Welcome. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to settle in. Let your shoulders drop, let your breath slow, and allow the day to drift quietly into the background. This is your time, a quiet space where nothing is expected of you and nothing needs your attention. As you listen, let the soft rhythm of the words guide you gently toward rest. There is no rush here, no pressure, only calm and the steady comfort of a slow unfolding story. Tonight, we'll travel to a small, quiet town, a place untouched by noise, a place where winter moves softly and where silence feels warm instead of empty. Let the world outside fade. Let your thoughts loosen and allow yourself to drift slowly and peacefully into the quiet of the night. When you're ready, we'll begin. Alder Creek was a quiet, timeless town. Snow softened every sound, and the nights felt long and gentle. Streetlights hummed softly, giving the whole place a calm, steady rhythm. The main road ran through the center, lined with small shops and a diner that closed early. At night, warm lights glowed behind frosted windows, making the town feel safe and slow. People waved when they passed each other, not out of habit, but because that was the way Alder Creek worked. Life moved gently here, without rush, without noise, without change. Winter shaped everything. Snow drifted across rooftops and fences, settling in soft layers. Footsteps vanished quickly, and the cold air carried a quiet that felt almost comforting. Most evenings were predictable. A radio playing faintly in a living room, the wind brushing against houses, and the soft glow of lamps behind curtains. Nothing dramatic ever disturbed the peace. Some nights, the snowfall was so gentle that the whole town seemed to breathe slowly. In those moments, Alder Creek felt untouched by time, wrapped in a silence that felt warm, not empty. It was a place where days blended softly into one another, where the world outside felt distant, where quiet wasn't a lack of sound, but a presence, steady, calm, and deeply familiar. Daniel Harper was 36 years old, though he carried himself with a quiet stillness that made him seem older. He lived alone in a small house near the edge of Alder Creek, where the forest thickened and the snow gathered in deeper drifts. His home was modest, with a narrow kitchen, a single bedroom, and a living room lit by a warm lamp that cast soft amber light across the walls each evening. Daniel's days followed a gentle rhythm. He woke in the late afternoon, when the winter sun hung low and pale. He made the same breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, and black coffee, and sat at the same spot at the table. The house was always quiet at that hour, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint whisper of wind brushing against the windows. After breakfast, he walked through town. His route never changed. Past the post office, past the diner, past the row of small shops that rarely updated their displays. People nodded to him, and he nodded back. He didn't linger, but he wasn't unfriendly. He simply moved through the world at his own pace, slow, steady, unhurried. Daniel worked nights as a cleaner. He moved through empty hallways, silent classrooms, and quiet offices with a calm, deliberate pace. He liked the silence. It wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. The hum of fluorescent lights, the soft echo of his footsteps, the distant creak of old pipes, these sounds comforted him. They were predictable, they were simple, they asked nothing from him. Sometimes he paused in the middle of a hallway, just listening. Not for anything specific, just for the quiet itself. The kind of quiet that only existed when the world was asleep. On weekends, Daniel followed the same quiet routine. He visited the small grocery store near the center of town, always at the same hour, always with the same slow, steady steps. The cashier greeted him with a familiar smile, and Daniel returned it with a polite nod. He bought little bread, coffee, a few cans of soup, but the ritual itself mattered more than the items he carried home. It gave shape to his days, a gentle anchor in a world that rarely changed. Evenings before work were the calmest part of his life. He would sit on his worn couch, a blanket draped over the armrest, and open a book he had read many times before. He didn't read to discover anything new. He read because the words were familiar, predictable, comforting. The soft glow of the lamp beside him warmed the room, and the house settled into its usual stillness, as if it exhaled with him. Outside, snow often drifted past the windows in slow, wandering patterns. The world beyond the glass felt distant, softened by winter's quiet touch. Inside, Daniel breathed calmly, letting the silence fill the space around him. He didn't mind the solitude. It wasn't loneliness to him, just a gentle kind of quiet that matched the rhythm of his days. People in Alder Creek knew him, but only in the way you know someone who has always been there. A steady presence, a calm figure moving through the same streets, the same routines year after year. And though nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen in his life, Daniel found a quiet comfort in the simplicity of it all. Some nights, after finishing his shift, Daniel took the long way home. The streets of Alder Creek were nearly empty at that hour, lit only by the soft glow of street lamps and the pale shimmer of moonlight on fresh snow. His breath rose in slow clouds as he walked, and the quiet wrapped around him like a familiar coat. He liked these late walks. They gave him time to unwind, to let the noise of the day settle into something softer. He often passed the old library, its windows dark, its steps covered in a thin layer of frost. The building had been closed for years, but Daniel always slowed his pace when he walked by. Something about the place felt comforting, as if it held memories of a time when the town had been livelier, when people gathered inside to escape the cold and lose themselves in stories. As he continued down the road, he sometimes noticed small details others might overlook. The way snow gathered in perfect curves along fences, the faint sparkle of ice crystals on tree branches, the gentle hum of a distant heater working through the night. These quiet moments grounded him. They reminded him that even in a world that rarely changed, there was beauty in the smallest things. When he finally reached his house, he stepped inside and let the warmth settle over him. He hung his coat, loosened his boots, and stood for a moment in the entryway, listening to the stillness. The house felt peaceful, as if it had been waiting patiently for him to return. He moved through his nightly routine with the same calm rhythm, washing his hands, warming a cup of tea, and sitting by the window to watch the last flakes of snow drift down. There were evenings when Daniel felt a quiet pull toward the edge of town, a gentle urge to step outside after his tea had cooled and the house had settled into its familiar stillness. On those nights, he would put on his coat, wrap a scarf loosely around his neck, and step out into the soft hush of Alder Creek's winter air. The streets were calm at that hour, touched only by the faint glow of porch lights and the distant hum of a lone car passing somewhere far away. Snow blanketed everything in a muted softness, smoothing out the edges of fences, rooftops, and mailboxes. Daniel walked slowly, letting his boots sink into the powder with each step. The sound was faint, almost musical, a gentle crunch that echoed in the quiet. He often followed the same path, one that led him past the old community center and down toward the frozen pond. The surface of the water shimmered faintly under the moonlight, a thin layer of ice stretching across it like frosted glass. Daniel would pause there, hands in his pockets, watching the way the wind brushed lightly across the snow. The world felt peaceful in those moments, as if time itself had slowed to match his pace. Sometimes he noticed small details, a single set of footprints leading toward the woods, the soft flicker of a candle in a neighbor's window, or the distant hoot of an owl perched somewhere unseen. These quiet observations grounded him. They reminded him that even in a life shaped by routine, there were always small, gentle surprises waiting to be noticed. When the cold finally began to settle into his fingers, Daniel turned back toward home. The walk was unhurried, each step steady and familiar, and when he reached his front door, he felt a subtle warmth in his chest, a quiet contentment that came not from excitement or change, but from the simple comfort of returning to a place that felt entirely his own. Inside, the house welcomed him with its soft glow and steady silence. Daniel hung his coat, warmed his hands, and let the calm of the night settle around him once more. There were quiet moments when Daniel's thoughts drifted back to his childhood, not in sharp memories or dramatic scenes, but in soft impressions, warm colors, gentle sounds, and the feeling of simpler days. He rarely spoke about his past, even to himself, yet certain evenings seemed to invite those old fragments to the surface. He remembered the small house he grew up in, a place not so different from the one he lived in now. The walls had been painted a pale yellow, and the floors creaked softly under every step. In winter, the windows would fog over from the warmth inside, and he would trace shapes on the glass with his fingertips. He could still recall the faint scent of pine, from the old wooden furniture and the way the morning light filtered through the curtains in long, gentle beams. There had been a quietness in that home too, a calm that settled over everything like a soft blanket. His parents weren't loud people. They spoke gently, moved slowly, and filled the house with a steady, comforting presence. Daniel often wondered if that was where his love for silence began, those early mornings when the world felt still and the only sound was the distant hum of the heater waking up. He remembered winter walks with his father, the two of them moving through snow-covered fields with no particular destination. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The shared silence felt natural, almost sacred. Sometimes his father would point out small things, a bird perched on a fence, the way frost formed delicate patterns on fallen leaves. Daniel had learned to notice the world that way, not through noise or excitement, but through quiet observation. As he sat in his living room now, wrapped in the soft glow of his lamp, those memories felt like warm embers, faint but comforting. They didn't make him long for the past. Instead, they reminded him that the life he lived now, with its gentle routines and peaceful evenings, was not so different from the one he had known as a child. It was a life shaped by stillness, a life shaped by quiet moments, a life that felt, in its own simple way, complete. Daniel had lived in Alder Creek for most of his life, long enough to know the town's rhythms, as well as his own. He knew which porch lights stayed on through the night, which chimneys released the first curls of smoke on cold mornings, and which streets were always the last to be cleared after a heavy snowfall. The town wasn't large, but it held a quiet charm that suited him perfectly. People recognized him, though not in a way that demanded conversation. They saw him as part of the landscape, steady, familiar, dependable. When he passed by the bakery, the owner often gave him a small nod through the window. At the post office, the clerk greeted him with a gentle evening, without expecting anything more. These small exchanges were enough for Daniel. They reminded him that he belonged here, even if he moved through life softly. There was comfort in the predictability of Alder Creek. The same families had lived there for generations, and the same traditions returned each year with the changing seasons. Winter brought the lantern walk along the riverbank, where children carried small lights that flickered like fireflies in the dark. Spring brought the slow thaw of the lake, and the first signs of green pushing through the melting snow. Daniel didn't participate in every event, but he liked knowing they existed. They gave the town a heartbeat. Sometimes, during his evening walks, he would pass by the diner and see the same group of older men gathered at the corner booth, sipping coffee and talking quietly. Their voices blended with the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of the heater. Daniel never joined them, but he found comfort in the scene. It was a reminder that life in Alder Creek moved at a gentle pace, untouched by the rush of the outside world. He appreciated that the town didn't expect anything from him. It didn't push him to be more social, more outgoing, or more involved. It simply let him exist in his own quiet way. And in return, Daniel respected the town's stillness, its traditions, and its slow, steady rhythm. Alder Creek wasn't just where he lived. It was where he felt at ease, where the quiet matched the cadence of his own thoughts, where he could move gently through each day, knowing the world around him would do the same. When Daniel wasn't working or walking through the quiet streets of Alder Creek, he spent his evenings with small hobbies that suited his calm nature. Nothing loud, nothing demanding, just gentle pastimes that filled the hours with a soft sense of purpose. One of his favorites was tinkering with old radios. He kept a small collection on a shelf in the living room, each one worn by time, each with its own quiet history. He never tried to restore them to perfection. Instead, he enjoyed the slow process of opening them up, brushing away dust, tightening a loose wire, or replacing a small part that had long since given up. Sometimes, after a bit of patient work, a faint crackle would come through the speaker, followed by a distant voice or a soft melody drifting in from some faraway station. Daniel always smiled at those moments. It felt like bringing a forgotten object back to life, even if only for a little while. He also kept a small notebook on the coffee table, filled with simple sketches, nothing elaborate, just outlines of trees, rooftops, or the curve of the riverbank in winter. Drawing helped him slow down even more, letting his thoughts settle as his pencil moved quietly across the page. He never showed the sketches to anyone. They were just for him, small reflections of the world he saw during his walks. Sometimes, on especially quiet nights, he would sit by the window with a cup of tea and listen to the faint hum of the town, a distant train passing, the soft rustle of wind against the siding, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the street. These sounds were gentle reminders that he wasn't alone, even if he lived a solitary life. The world around him breathed in its own slow rhythm, and he felt connected to it in a quiet, unspoken way. His hobbies didn't fill his life with excitement, but they filled it with peace, and for Daniel that was more than enough. They gave shape to his evenings, softened the edges of long winter nights, and reminded him that even the smallest moments could hold a quiet kind of beauty. Winter nights in Alder Creek had a way of settling into Daniel's thoughts, filling his mind with a calm he rarely found during the day. After his walks, after the tea, after the house had grown still again, he often sat by the window and watched the sky shift slowly from deep blue to soft charcoal. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow across the snow-covered yard, and the world outside seemed to breathe in long, quiet intervals. Daniel liked these moments. They felt suspended, as if time had loosened its grip just enough for him to drift a little. He would rest his elbows on the windowsill, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and let his gaze soften. The snow reflected the moonlight in tiny, shimmering points, like scattered stars fallen to the ground. Sometimes he imagined the whole town was asleep beneath a blanket of silver, His thoughts moved gently on nights like this, not in sharp lines or heavy reflections, but in soft currents. He thought about the small routines that shaped his days, the familiar faces he passed in town, the quiet comfort of returning home after work. He didn't question his life or wish for something different. Instead, he simply observed it, the way one might watch snowflakes drifting past a window, slow, steady, peaceful. Occasionally, a distant sound would rise through the stillness, the soft rumble of a snowplow turning a corner, the faint bark of a dog, or the creak of a tree branch shifting under the weight of frost. These sounds didn't disturb him. They blended into the night, becoming part of the quiet rather than breaking it. Daniel often stayed by the window longer than he realized. The warmth of the mug would fade, the tea cooling slowly, but he didn't mind. The night had a way of holding him gently, inviting him to linger in its calm. And when he finally rose to prepare for bed, he carried that stillness with him, a soft, steady presence that settled into his chest like a quiet reassurance. For Daniel, winter nights weren't cold or lonely. They were peaceful. They were familiar. They were home. Every now and then, something small shifted in Daniel's routine, not enough to unsettle him, but just enough to make the day feel a little different. One evening, after finishing his tea, he noticed a faint glow coming from the house across the street. It wasn't unusual for lights to be on, but this one flickered softly, as if someone had placed a candle near the window. Daniel paused by his own window, watching the gentle shimmer dance across the glass. He didn't know the new neighbor well. They had moved in a few weeks earlier, arriving quietly with a small moving truck and a handful of boxes. Daniel had nodded to them once, a polite greeting exchanged across the snowy yard, but nothing more. Still, the warm glow from their window added a subtle sense of life to the street, a soft reminder that even in the quietest corners of Alder Creek, small changes drifted in like snowflakes. Later that night, during his walk, Daniel took a slightly different route. Instead of turning left at the old community center, he continued straight, following a narrow path he hadn't walked in months. The snow was untouched there, forming smooth, gentle curves along the edges of the trail. His footsteps left crisp impressions behind him, the only marks on the otherwise perfect surface. The air felt colder on this path, sharper against his cheeks, but Daniel didn't mind. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with frost. A faint breeze rustled through them, creating a soft whisper that blended with the distant hum of the town. He paused for a moment, breathing in the stillness, letting the quiet settle deep inside him. When he eventually returned home, he felt a subtle shift within himself. Not excitement, not restlessness, just a gentle awareness. A reminder that even the smallest changes could bring a new kind of calm. He hung his coat, warmed his hands, and glanced once more at the flickering light across the street. It was a small thing, but sometimes small things were enough to make the night feel just a little different. As the days passed, Daniel's routines continued with their familiar steadiness, each moment unfolding with the same quiet rhythm he had always known. Yet, beneath the surface of his calm life, something subtle had begun to shift. Not a disruption, not a disturbance, just a faint sense of movement, like the first soft breeze before a change in the weather. He didn't notice it at first. It was too gentle, too quiet. A small thought here, a lingering feeling there, a slight awareness that the world around him was slowly opening in ways he hadn't expected. The winter nights still held their peaceful silence, and the snow still fell in soft, drifting patterns. But something in the air felt different, warmer, brighter, almost as if the town itself was preparing for something new. And without realizing it, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of a new chapter one that would unfold just as quietly as the life he already knew, but with a depth he had never allowed himself to explore. With that quiet shift, the story moved gently forward. The change began on an ordinary morning, the kind of morning Daniel had lived through countless times before. The sky was pale, the air crisp, and the snow outside his window shimmered softly under the early light. He rose at his usual hour, made his coffee, and stood by the window as he always did, watching the world wake slowly around him. But today, something caught his eye. A small, moving truck had parked across the street, its engine humming softly in the cold air. Two people stepped out, one carrying a box, the other brushing snow from their coat. Their movements were unhurried, their voices low, blending gently with the quiet of the morning. Daniel watched them for a moment, not out of curiosity, but because the scene felt strangely significant, as if it marked the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. The house across the street had been empty for months, its windows dark, its porch untouched by footprints. Now, for the first time in a long while, there was life there, soft, steady, and new. Daniel took a slow sip of his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through his hands. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know why they had come. But something about their arrival settled gently into his thoughts, like a quiet ripple across still water. And without fully understanding why, Daniel felt the faintest spark of anticipation. Throughout the morning, Daniel found his attention drifting back to the house across the street. He didn't stare, didn't linger at the window, but every so often he caught himself glancing in that direction, listening to the faint sounds of boxes being moved and footsteps crunching through the snow. It wasn't curiosity in the usual sense. It was something gentler, an awareness, a quiet interest that settled into him like a soft echo. By midday, the moving truck had gone, leaving behind a few footprints on the walkway and a single porch light glowing faintly against the pale winter sky. The house looked different now. Not just occupied, but alive in a way it hadn't been for months. A curtain had been drawn back in one of the upstairs windows, and a small wreath hung on the front door, simple and understated. Daniel stepped outside to clear a bit of snow from his walkway. The air was crisp, the kind that made each breath feel clean and sharp. As he worked, he noticed someone standing on the porch across the street, a woman bundled in a thick coat, brushing snow from a cardboard box. She paused for a moment, looking around the neighborhood as if taking it all in. Their eyes met briefly. It wasn't a long moment, just a passing acknowledgement, but something about it felt warm. She offered a small, polite smile, the kind people give when they're new somewhere and trying to understand the rhythm of a place. Daniel returned the gesture with a quiet nod before going back to his shovel. He didn't think much of it, not yet. But the moment lingered with him as he finished clearing the snow, as he hung his coat inside, and even as he made himself a fresh cup of coffee. There was something about her presence, soft, unhurried, almost familiar, that settled into his thoughts like a gentle ripple. Alder Creek didn't change often, but when it did, the changes arrived quietly, like snowfall in the early morning. And Daniel, without fully realizing it, had begun to notice. The next morning unfolded with the same gentle rhythm as always. Daniel woke early, made his coffee, and let the quiet of the house settle around him. Yet, as he stood by the window, watching the pale light stretch across the snow, his gaze drifted once more toward the house across the street. A soft trail of footprints led from the porch to the mailbox, delicate impressions in the fresh snow. The porch light was still on, casting a warm glow that contrasted with the cold morning air. It gave the house a sense of warmth, a sense of presence. Daniel found himself lingering at the window a little longer than usual, though he couldn't quite explain why. Later, as he stepped outside to head to work, he noticed the woman again. She was kneeling by the front steps, brushing snow away from a small welcome mat she had placed there. Her movements were slow and thoughtful, as if she were taking her time to settle into the new space. When she looked up, their eyes met once more. This time, she offered a small wave. It was a simple gesture, quiet, polite, unassuming. But something about it felt warm in the cold morning air. Daniel returned the wave with a gentle nod before continuing down the walkway. He didn't feel the need to say anything. The moment itself felt complete, soft, and unhurried. As he walked toward the main road, he found his thoughts drifting back to her, not in a restless way, but in the same calm manner he noticed the world around him. A new presence in the neighborhood, a new rhythm settling into the quiet streets of Alder Creek. He wondered briefly what had brought her here. People didn't often move to Alder Creek without a reason, but he didn't dwell on it. The town had a way of revealing things slowly, in its own time. And Daniel, patient as always, was content to let the days unfold gently, one quiet moment at a time. The following days passed quietly, each one unfolding with the familiar softness of winter in Alder Creek. Daniel continued with his routines, moving through the calm rhythm of work, evening walks, and the gentle stillness of his home. Yet every so often, his thoughts drifted toward the house across the street. He noticed small changes each day, subtle signs that the new neighbor was settling in. A pair of boots left neatly by the porch, a small lamp glowing in the upstairs window during the early evening, a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney, curling softly into the cold air. These details blended naturally into the landscape of the neighborhood, but Daniel found himself quietly aware of them, as if they added a new note to the familiar melody of his days. One evening, as he stepped outside for his usual walk, he saw her again. She was standing by her mailbox, brushing a thin layer of snow from its top. The sky above them was a deep shade of blue, the kind that appears just before night fully settles in. The street was quiet, touched only by the soft glow of street lamps and the gentle crunch of snow beneath their feet. She looked up as he approached, offering a small, warm smile. "Cold evening," she said softly, her voice carrying easily in the still air. Daniel nodded. It usually is this time of year. There was no rush in her expression, no expectation, just a simple, friendly moment shared between two people on a quiet winter street. They stood there for a few seconds, the silence between them comfortable, almost peaceful. "I'm still getting used to the place," she added, glancing toward her house. "It's quieter than I expected." Daniel let out a gentle breath, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Alder Creek tends to be that way." She nodded, as if the answer made sense to her. Then, with a polite good night, she turned and walked back toward her porch, her footsteps leaving soft impressions in the snow. Daniel continued his walk, the cold air brushing lightly against his face. The brief conversation lingered with him, not because it was unusual, but because it felt natural, fitting seamlessly into the quiet rhythm of his life. A small moment, a gentle exchange. But sometimes that was all it took for something new to begin settling into place. As the week went on, the quiet rhythm of Alder Creek settled back into place, gently absorbing the presence of the new neighbor as if she had always belonged there. Daniel continued with his routines, each day unfolding with the same soft steadiness he had grown so accustomed to. Yet something in the air felt subtly different, now lighter, warmer, touched by a quiet sense of connection he hadn't expected. He noticed her occasionally through his window, carrying a box inside, adjusting a curtain, or brushing snow from her steps. Their interactions remained simple, small nods, brief smiles, a few soft words exchanged in the cold evening air. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just gentle moments that drifted naturally into the calm of his days. One evening, as Daniel returned from his walk, he paused at the end of his driveway. The sky above was a deep, velvety blue, sprinkled with faint stars barely visible through the winter haze. The street was silent, touched only by the soft glow of porch lights and the distant hum of the wind moving through the trees. Across the street, her porch light flickered softly, casting a warm halo around the snow-covered steps. She stepped outside for a moment, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. When she noticed Daniel, she offered a small, quiet smile. the kind that didn't ask for anything, but simply acknowledged the shared stillness of the night. Daniel returned a smile, feeling a gentle warmth settle in his chest. There was no need for words. The moment itself was enough. He continued toward his front door, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. Inside, the familiar warmth of his home wrapped around him, steady and comforting. He hung his coat, lit a small lamp, and let the quiet settle around him like a soft blanket. As he sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, he looked out at the peaceful street, at the soft glow of lights, at the gentle stillness that had always defined Alder Creek. And for the first time in a long while, he felt not just content, but quietly hopeful. Not for anything grand or dramatic, just for the simple possibility of new moments, new connections, new warmth, drifting gently into the quiet corners of his life. The night deepened, calm and steady, and Daniel, wrapped in the soft glow of his living room, let himself rest in the quiet comfort of it all. And so, the quiet days in Alder Creek drifted gently to a close, wrapped in the soft stillness of winter. Daniel's world remained calm, steady, familiar, shaped by small routines, gentle moments, and the quiet presence of a new neighbor who brought a subtle warmth to the cold season. Nothing dramatic had happened, no loud twists, no sudden turns, just a simple story, unfolding softly in the quiet corners of a small town. A story about stillness, a story about noticing the small things, a story about the gentle rhythm of ordinary days. Most of all, it was a story meant to slow your breathing, soften your thoughts, and ease the weight of the day from your shoulders. A story designed to settle into your mind like falling snow, quiet, steady, peaceful, until your body relaxes and your eyes grow heavy. Because sometimes the calmest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest, the ones that don't ask anything of us, the ones that simply invite us to rest. So as the night deepens and the world around you grows still, let the quiet of Alder Creek linger a little longer. Let Daniel's gentle routines and the soft winter air guide you toward the comfort of sleep. This was a story about calm, a story about quiet moments, a story to help you drift peacefully into rest. And now it's time to let go, to breathe slowly, to settle into the warmth of your own night. Sleep well,